Story 1. Growing up Mormon, my parents were pretty conservative, especially my father. My first election to vote in was 2020, and I was serving a mission at the time. I spent a long time trying to decide because I was passively fed a lot of misinformation, such as that the Republican Party handles the economy better. I chose Donald Trump and immediately regretted it. I remember bypassing the restrictions on my phone just to get election updates, and when I saw Joe Biden was going to win, it was the biggest relief. Since returning from my mission, I have worked hard to deconstruct all the harmful ideology I was taught. Doing so helped me come to terms with being bisexual as well. Though I would never have said I was part of the Make America Great Again movement, I always thought he was an awful human being. Casting that vote and feeling instant regret really pushed me to educate myself better, and I am very glad for it. Story 2. My grandpa was not really a supporter of Make America Great Again, but he definitely had a neutral to positive view of Donald Trump when he first ran in 2016. Then Donald Trump's inappropriate comments went viral. My grandpa was totally disgusted. He was adamant that no good man would speak about women like that. He disliked him until his death a couple of years ago. Story 3. Not a former Make America Great Again supporter myself, but my grandmother, who was fully on board as far as I knew, recently told me that she thinks the deportations make him seem kind of like Adolf Hitler. Of all the things I wished to bring them around, I was surprised and proud that it was this. Story 4. When I watched my coworker and the person I grew up with, the one I named my son after, live stream himself storming the Capitol while also watching it on the news, that's when I truly woke up. Story 5. It was my state Republicans overturning something the people voted on. I have woken up a lot here in the last couple of months. Story 6. What most people do not realize is that however bad Donald Trump is, his voters are convinced that the Democratic Party is worse. They believe every conspiracy about the Democrats as gospel and consider anything negative about Donald Trump to be false. They believe Democrats are killing babies after birth, forcing gender changes on children, burning flags, and trying to give all tax money to illegal immigrants. It does not matter what Donald Trump does in real life because nothing is worse than the perceived evil on the other side, attributed to the unseen deep state. They are so far down the figurative Democrats are the Antichrist rabbit hole that they cannot recognize the literal Antichrist in front of them. Story 7. Presidents should not have fans, only critics. They are there to do a job. Story 8. The Epstein Files. He campaigned on releasing them and we supported him for it. But then he outright called us stupid for wanting to see them after it was revealed that his name might be in them. Like, tell me you did something wrong without saying it directly. Story 9. My mom thought he was going to make things better for the working class. He was going to be like Robin Hood and address corruption in a way that gives normal people a leg up. The illusion is completely broken now. The way the administration has treated immigrants, targeting people without criminal records, men looking for work in Home Depots, and in particular the Abrigo Garcia case, has caused my mom to say for the first time that Donald Trump is evil. My mom is also about to buy a gun for the first time. Story 10. My folks were never Make America Great Again but are Reaganite Republicans, so they held their noses and voted for him the first time. They are also terrified of and deeply hate Russia and are very, very pro-Ukraine. They were furious about Trump's rhetoric on that. They did not vote for him this time and hate 90% of what he is doing. Story 11. I remember when misspelling potato was the end of your career. Story 12. My brother's girlfriend's mother reached her breaking point because of the so-called big, beautiful bill. She was so used to the Republican Party failing to cut benefits for senior citizens that when they did, she was very upset. Story 13. Not me, but my grandmother voted for him the first time. She saw how awful he did and finally admitted to us that she voted for the wrong person, which I appreciated. It's hard to admit you are wrong. Story 14. A fellow supervisor I work with is a fairly moderate individual and believed the idea that he isn't a politician and thought a lot would have changed politically. He was fully supporting the Make America Great Again movement. The world was going to change. The economy in the United States would boom like it never had before. He bought into all the false promises. As the years passed, nothing happened. Eventually, it all fell apart for him. He saw him as a fraud and a joke. The complaints really made him look weak to my coworker. The events of January 6th and everything after made it worse, and he felt it was even worse during the most recent election period. Currently, he is still a moderate individual but is just as baffled as the rest of us whenever Donald Trump speaks. Story 15. My father, a die-hard Republican, voted for Donald Trump twice. This spring, I had a miscarriage that resulted in me hemorrhaging. I was in the emergency room with my father, bleeding heavily, when the emergency room decided to perform a dilation and curettage procedure. When I woke up from surgery, he was crying, thinking I was going to die. He realized that if it had not been for my state's constitution, I would not have been saved. He changed his entire view on abortion rights. He is now a non-Republican registered voter in a primarily red state. Location: Alaska. I did not expect this comment to receive so much attention. Thank you all for your kind words. Story 16. January 6th. That is the day I gave up trying to support him. Up until that day, I had doubts about him and his group of people, but nothing made me stop supporting him. What really drove me crazy was that all the Discord servers and groups I was in talked a lot about how America is the best and our government rules, and there is nothing better. But then the election happened, and suddenly it was all fake and rigged. A complete reversal with no build-up or explanation. They didn't even try to coax you into it. They just suddenly went against everything they said. I couldn't understand why Mike Pence needed to be killed or arrested. To me, he did nothing wrong. It was obvious he was a scapegoat. This only turned me away from Make America Great Again even more, as they couldn't handle a loss and had to be sore losers. I could go on about that day and what came from it. But in the end, I realized they are just a bunch of cowards who can't admit they lost or that they are wrong. When something doesn't go their way, they blame someone else. If something good happens, Make America Great Again did it, and if not, Make America Great Again didn't. That seems to be their motto. Story 17. I voted Republican nearly my whole life, including 2016. I told a liberal friend in 2016, "What's the worst that can happen? The terrible handling of the pandemic, all those speeches where his scientists were dying inside because of the falsehoods he was stating, downplaying it, refusing to encourage mask use, the anti-science and anti-intellectualism. I knew people who got really sick and lost elderly relatives. I voted straight Democratic in 2020. Then January 6th happened and confirmed that any redeeming qualities of the Republican Party I grew up with were gone. I haven't voted for a Republican since. Probably never will. The party that I once believed stood for smaller government and lower taxes now represents the worst of us. Bigotry, xenophobia, and fiscal irresponsibility by giving billionaires tax breaks while raising tariffs on all of us. Story 18. Not an American, but was open-minded to see how Make America Great Again would turn out for the United States. Donald Trump, in my opinion, lost any right to be president when he made fun of that disabled reporter on live television. If you cannot show respect and dignity to people like that, you do not deserve a position of power. Story 19. My prefrontal cortex developed in my late teens, and I saw it for what it was, a group of hateful individuals. Story 20. Hate to admit it, but I voted for him the first time. I was surrounded by a conservative religious community that said Hillary was a snake about to stab the nation in the back. They claimed she wanted to drug all the children, and that the Clintons were deep state operatives. I was young and at the end of my libertarian phase, so I voted for Donald Trump. I realized it was a huge mistake within the first couple of years. I also moved away from that community and ended up leaning center-left shortly after. Story 21. What I really want to know is why members of the Republican Party in Congress are staying with him. I understand politics. I am not Mary Poppins, but these are powerful people. Why on earth would they bother listening to this fool? We have senators openly spouting absolute nonsense. Senator Lindsey Graham openly contradicts himself to support the former president. None of it matters. There has to be more psychologically happening here, right? Story 22. Not me, but my dad's wife voted for him in 2016 and now hates him. The turning point for her was his handling of the pandemic and the classified documents case. That alone upset her, in addition to the rest of us who are all ex-military and take that very seriously. Story 23. I realized how much he was hurting the women in my life. Spitting sexism, being aggressive, never talking to a woman with respect, and trying to restrict freedoms. Story 24. It was not any one thing, but a couple. I remember the Sharpie on the weather map. Also, when General James Mattis left as Secretary of Defense, he said something about giving him his nickname. As a Marine, I was a big fan of General James Mattis. Story 25. About 4 months into his first presidency, I heard the grab them by the private parts comment. I will admit I was a very ignorant voter back then. I did not do my research on what kind of a man he was. The only time I heard Donald Trump's name mentioned in my life was in that Mac Miller song. Rest in peace. I never knew about the atrocious things he did with his apartments and so on. I figured, finally, a person who is not a sleazy politician and says it like it is. It is embarrassing to admit, to be honest. Story 26. Voted for him in 2016. Active member of the Donald during its heyday. I believed he really would root out what I saw as inefficiency and team politics. He used to be a Democrat and donated across the aisle. Around 2018, I realized he was not a serious person and unfit for the highest office of the country I love. I dug deeper and realized if someone with his background showed up at my business to be hired, I would have security escort him out. Think about your job right now and imagine a coworker was accused of sexual assault. Now imagine it happening repeatedly. They were taken to court multiple times. Would you still want to work with them? That same employee also stiffed contractors in your town and behaved inappropriately toward others. I had broken away from the bully pulpit's influence, and if you shrink him down to a small enough town, he would be run out for his actions. I do not know why he gets a pass at the highest level. Story 27. I liked him during my edgy boy college days and remember posting in support of him a lot, but did not pay much attention to him after the election. I sat through one of his COVID-19 press conferences and realized he is actually just very dumb. Now, every time I hear him talk, I cannot unhear how dumb he is. I have relatives who say I have gone woke. I have not. I have been center-right since I was 23. He is just very dumb, and yes, he is actually a racist. Story 28. I was fully committed to Make America Great Again until I realized in therapy that I was gay and was using Make America Great Again as a scapegoat to cover up internalized homophobia. Story 29. My friend's husband just had his moment when he saw United States soldiers on their knees, pulling out a red carpet for Vladimir Putin. He threw all his Make America Great Again items away and said he was done. Story 30. It is an abusive relationship. It embarrasses them, so they stay and try to justify his behavior. Story 31. January 6th wake-up call. I had just finished getting my degree from my conservative college where I voted for Donald Trump because all my friends in the faculty encouraged it, and I did not know any better. After January 6th, I really started asking myself questions about my values. I realized everything I had been supporting was completely against what is moral and true. Story 32. This whole use of military troops as police is definitely a breaking point for me. Story 33. I voted for him in 2016. I had signs in my yard. I was convinced he was not a politician, and that was what we needed. The Drain the Swamp movement. I even voted for him in 2020. It was really January 6th, and subsequently, his term numbers were released that I became disgusted with myself. I voted for Kamala Harris last year, and frankly, I wish something bad would happen to Donald Trump. He is easily my biggest regret politically. Story 34. For a friend and coworker. It was January 6th. He dislikes Donald Trump now. Story 35. Unsurprisingly, it seems most of these answers boil down to, I did not care until it affected me negatively. Everything that hurt others I was and continue to be fine with. Story 36. I never really considered myself Make America Great Again, but I was briefly aligned with Donald Trump in the sense that I thought the Democrats losing to him twice in a row might give the party a kick in the pants and make it realize it needs to improve. Project 2025 made me realize he was not just a mostly harmless clown to be used as a middle finger to the status quo, so I voted for Kamala Harris. Story 37. I hope everyone sees that he is a clear pedophile and recognizes that he keeps trying to protect pedophiles. That should be the moment that changes everyone's view. Story 38. I was never Make America Great Again, just Republican. I hated him from day one and voted against him in the 2016 primaries, but I held my nose and voted for him the first time around. I mostly figured he was an idiot but might bumble his way into doing some things I liked. I thought the more moderate Republicans around him would keep his worse impulses in check. But the Make America Great Again movement kept growing and attracting other politicians. Project 2025 ended it for me. A horrible, not conservative, authoritarian plan. That's when I realized the Make America Great Again movement had grown to include smart, evil people. So I didn't vote for him in 2024, and since the Make America Great Again movement controls the whole party now, I don't know if or when I will vote Republican again. Story 39. I was part of the movement for about 2 weeks. I didn't know much about him. I thought the existing Republican Party candidates seemed so weak, and I thought Hillary just seemed like she was entitled to the nomination and presidency. Once I realized how cruel and awful he was, I left and ended up voting for Johnson and Weld. Not that it made any difference in my very deep red state. Even after he was first elected, I thought, let's see what he does. Maybe he would become more centered and presidential. No, it has been hell, honestly. So many family members have grown more toxic, cynical, mean, and bigoted as the situation has worsened. Story 40. When honest questions got me labeled a traitor, that was when I knew it was a personality cult, not a platform. Story 41. I was 14 when I liked him. I changed my mind when I realized that I was bisexual, had a lot of religious guilt, and that my beliefs only came from being a highly manipulable child with limited outside exposure who had been taught social values that were intolerant. Story 42. My best friend's parents were deeply supportive of the Make America Great Again movement. They still were after she came out as transgender. It took me confronting them and explaining exactly who they voted for and what he wants to do to people like their daughter. A month later, they had burned the Texas and American flags they had on their house and replaced them with lesbian and transgender flags. Story 43. In 2016, I voted for him once. I never really believed in Make America Great Again, but I still made that regretful choice. Back then, I was right libertarian. I didn't like what he said about Mexicans, and I really wanted someone more moderate like Rand Paul to win. When he didn't get the nomination and Donald Trump did, I officially switched to libertarian to vote for Gary Johnson. Eventually, I learned about the situation in Aleppo, and Trump was all that was left. I got into YouTubers like Sargon of Akkad, Frachan, and the memes, and I hopped on the bandwagon. I thought social justice warriors were insufferable back then, which I later found out was a misunderstanding. Over the years, he didn't seem to accomplish much, and I gradually became more disconnected from that camp, but I made some excuses for him and disagreed with some things he did. The tipping point was when COVID-19 happened. I realized the problem with my libertarian beliefs when there was an issue with how decentralized the United States was in response to the crisis. When Trump downplayed the virus, that was the last straw, and I would never support him again. I didn't vote for him in 2020 but defaulted to the libertarian candidate because Joe Biden seemed too old. I abandoned my libertarian beliefs completely in 2021 and became more of a leftist after working in retail and seeing how the poor struggle and the waste. I voted for Kamala Harris in 2024. I don't like a lot of politicians, so I voted for her out of pragmatism. I like Bernie Sanders though. Even back in 2016 I had respect for him, but I feel like he's too old. Maybe Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez might be the best option right now for president. Story 44. I voted for him when I was 18 during my first term and knew nothing about politics, buying into the idea of changing the norm. Then I became more informed. Story 45. In 2016, I was 18 and voted for Donald Trump because he was funny, witty, and a businessman. I thought an outsider would make life better since Barack Obama was disappointing. I still think that now, but for different reasons. He condemned the Iraq war and genuinely seemed supportive of the LGBTQ community, which to me painted him as someone outside the traditional Republican Party who just wanted to serve his country. It is jarring how he spoke about transgender people in 2016 versus how he does now. He did some things at first I supported, like saving an auto factory, going after ISIS, and pulling the United States out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But what changed my view on everything was Ajit Pai. Net neutrality is something that, if you understand it, you would never want to get rid of. It protects regular people and curbs abusive internet service provider behavior. It is really simple. The Federal Communications Commission Chair Ajit Pai made it his mission to eliminate net neutrality. Republicans framed net neutrality as Obama-era regulations hurting businesses. And for once I immediately knew how anti-consumer and wrong that was. When it finally came to an area I understood, I could see the cynical strategy for what it was. Ajit Pai, the Federal Communications Commission commissioner appointed by Donald Trump, used to work as a lawyer for Verizon. In what universe is he a good choice to regulate a company where he probably still has friends? That is when it became clear to me that Donald Trump was not a guy looking out for the average person. He was a wealthy individual helping out other wealthy individuals. No swamp draining, no working for the people, just someone in an ill-fitting suit helping his elitist friends. Then COVID-19 came, and it became unbelievably and consistently obvious that Donald Trump and his entire administration were wholly incompetent. It amazed me that he almost won re-election, and it still amazes me that he won the popular vote the previous time. Story 46. The craziest thing about this thread to me is that none of it was hidden. It was all out in the open the whole time. I will never understand. Story 47. I was a hardcore Make America Great Again supporter until Elon Musk, whom I have always despised and known was a person of questionable character since he called that diver a pedophile, became a Make America Great Again darling. I voted for Kamala Harris in 2024, and I am overwhelmingly disgusted with the party I used to be a part of. Story 48. Trump supporters identifying as Republicans are not conservative. They are the most radical political activists this country has seen recently. Story 49. Nervous to out myself, but it took me entirely too long, and hopefully someone in a similar spot will hear me in good faith instead of seeing me as another person with Trump derangement syndrome. To preface, the single greatest trapping component of Make America Great Again is that you believe that Donald Trump is the only politician left that is not part of the deep state. Because of this, they all want to take him down. They want to get rid of Trump so that their corruption is not uncovered. Any bad publicity you see about Trump is just deep state propaganda. It makes you not believe your own eyes and ignore the evidence against him. I was a cradle Republican. I attended Republican Women of Redacted County meetings and held signs at the polls with my mom as a little kid. I was raised deeply into the Republican Party. I started waking up just this year when I learned how bad things are in Gaza and how it could not be happening if not for us. Then I learned why people called it a genocide. Then I learned that nearly every Republican is lavishly funded by the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, Democrats too, but not quite as much. I am a Bible-believing Christian. I grew up being told that Israel is God's chosen nation and America's last line of defense against radical Islam. It is only by God's grace that I learned the terrible theology behind that. My God loves children. I cannot love God and support a genocide. The Epstein Files fiasco was the last straw where I completely disassociated myself with Trump and the Republican Party altogether. First, he was going to uproot the deep state and release the files when he got elected. Then the files were sitting on Redacted's desk. Then the files did not exist, and anyone who says otherwise is a radical Democrat conspiracy theorist. If you do not draw the line at a global child sex trafficking ring involving the most powerful people in the world, you are not a conservative. You are a Trump worshiper. It is also really scary to come out of Make America Great Again. Republicans hate you for leaving, and Democrats hate you for not leaving sooner. I would rather be a political orphan than support a genocidal liar who covers for pedophiles. To any Make America Great Again member reading this right now, it is not just the Democrats, they are both the deep state. If anything, it is the Republicans. You can maintain your conservative beliefs without supporting what the Republican Party has become today. Trump is not a Christian, a hero, or America's salvation from the deep state. Trump is the deep state. Story 50. The card house has not fallen yet. The Better Business Bureau does not blossom until after the midterm elections. Oil and gas have not poisoned the world yet, at least the part we live in. We might still be able to vote for now, Russia has not taken over, at least as far as we can see. Companies are absorbing the tariffs for now. All those things are on the way, though. Story 51. 3 things. 1. The complicated and problematic bill. 2. Law enforcement abusing their power, making violent arrests, and using rental trucks as deceptive tactics like extremist groups would. 3. The final straw was the Epstein files, which were deeply disturbing. Story 52. A MAGA uncle of mine came over to my parents' house the other day. He said, "I think Donald Trump might be corrupted." I was so astonished that I had nothing to say. Speechless. Honestly, I was afraid he had a brain tumor or something. Story 53. I work for the United States Postal Service. When he accused us of throwing away mail-in ballots, I was constantly harassed by random people while trying to do my job. Cars would pull up to me, roll down the window, and say things like, "You have been throwing away ballots? How many ballots have you thrown away? And if I see you throwing away ballots, I am going to get you fired." It was unreal. Edit. I would not say I was really part of the Make America Great Again movement. I just voted for him against Hillary Clinton. I gave up on him when he lost to Joe Biden and began his accusations. Story 54. He literally idolizes Vladimir Putin and wants his friends to have the enormous wealth of the Russian oligarchs who act with impunity, wasting their country's citizens' money while the masses starve and drink themselves to death. Great role model. Story 55. I was a conservative through my youth and mid-20s just because my family was and everyone else around me was. I live in a red state. Unfortunately, I voted for Donald Trump in 2016 because rather than caring that the guy was a problem, was accused of sexual misconduct, and said you can just grab a woman when you want, I looked the other way because, well, I was an idiot. I was also a Christian. I didn't actively read or search out anything political. As a result, nothing I saw on social media or the local news was from the other side of the spectrum. To put things bluntly and simply, I just went with the herd and I didn't care about anything outside of my bubble. The thing is, I have always had a ton of empathy for everyone. I care a lot when bad things happen to people who don't deserve it. I believe all men are created equal and that racists are scum. So in the years following the 2016 election, I got tired of all the constant hate being spread by the side I associated myself with. I was introduced to Reddit and, for once, I wasn't living in an echo chamber of the same hateful rhetoric that I always had been. And don't get me wrong, the far left can be just as hateful. I also slowly stopped becoming a Christian because there was just too much I couldn't ignore about it anymore. By 2019, I had decided that I had no political affiliation. I was certainly not conservative anymore, but I wasn't sure I wanted to be a Democrat either. I still don't consider myself one. Then COVID-19 hit and I watched as everyone I knew started spreading false rhetoric about a virus that was killing millions of people. A virus that almost killed my grandparents and accelerated my grandmother's dementia after she survived it. I watched our president refuse to do what needed to be done to save lives and was instead too busy golfing or telling his base that this was all a hoax and to not care about it. I got tired of having a president who couldn't string a coherent sentence together and who couldn't act professional for 5 minutes. Republicans just kept getting worse. People in my life who were always supporters of vaccines, who used to call anti-vaxxers crazy, were now those very same people. They would make fun of anyone who didn't want to get sick or wanted to protect their family or friends. It was the most vile thing I had ever seen. I knew I no longer wanted anything to do with that. Things have only devolved since. January 6th, all of the blatant racism, hating people who aren't like them, not wanting to care about their fellow man unless they are white like them, praising people being ripped away from their families and given no due process. People who have always preached doing things constitutionally are now okay with its violation as long as it makes them feel better. Donald Trump brought out the worst in so many people who had hidden their hate because they knew it was wrong. Family of mine who I always looked up to began showing their true colors. I am so glad that I am no longer part of that group of people. And the funny thing is, no one in my part of the country would ever know I am against their hate. I am a big burly, blue-collar diesel mechanic. I love guns, meat, race cars, and motorcycles. I want our country to be full of diversity and all of the things that our founding fathers wanted. I believe there is no place for racism or fascist ideals in this country. This country was built by the hands of immigrants. It belongs to everyone who comes here and works the land, feeds mouths, and builds it better. I know it isn't perfect and reform of a lot of government is needed. This is America, the land of the free. It does not belong to one ethnicity or religion. We should all want what is best for our fellow Americans. Story 56. Not personally a Make America Great Again fan, but many guys in my National Guard unit were diehard supporters of Donald Trump at the start of our last mission during the election. We were in the middle of training to go to the Middle East to provide air defense for multiple countries' troops stationed across several bases when the election results came out. Then we got overseas and Donald Trump started threatening to attack century-old allies, placing tariffs that destabilized the economy, and treating the National Guard like his own personal police force. Most of the men in my unit cannot stand him now. Honestly, I find it hard to feel sorry for those negatively affected because he did exactly what he said he would do. Overall, while the military tends to lean right, there are far more disgruntled troops than you might think, and I personally do not believe you will see United States soldiers doing anything more than standing on a sidewalk board while collecting a paycheck. Story 57. Grew up in a very conservative Christian household. Rush Limbaugh and Glenn Beck were always on the radio. Never challenged much because that was all I knew. Voted for Donald Trump in 2016. The real wake-up call was COVID-19. I quickly started to see the holes in the narratives and then the blatant disregard for people's health and safety. Started doing more of my own research and intentionally listening to both sides. It did not take long to shed the propaganda. Voted independent in 2020 because I still had 25 years of anti-Democrat indoctrination at that point and could not bring myself to do otherwise. Voted for Kamala Harris in 2024, pretty vehemently against all the things that this administration and the Republican Party are doing at this point. I cannot say the Democratic Party is winning me over, but it is where I most closely align now. Another factor was actually my faith. I grew up Christian, but ironically the Jesus I knew and know certainly does not condone any of the behaviors of the right. I still call myself a Christian, but unfortunately always have to clarify, I am not the Make America Great Again Jesus kind. Story 58. I was originally against Donald Trump when he ran his first campaign. I was in middle school at the time, and I watched him talk about how Mexico was sending bad people to our country, and I was infuriated because I come from a family of Mexican immigrants. I saw my poor grandmother cry because she was hurt by his words. My dad, however, agreed with him. He immigrated here as a child and believed that Donald Trump would handle illegal immigrants well because he thinks that they are cheaters. He somehow convinced me that Donald Trump was doing good for the country for a few years. Then COVID-19 hit. I took it seriously, and when I saw Make America Great Again and my own dad calling it a hoax and talking about how Dr. Anthony Fauci wants control, I started to question it. After some serious thought and critical thinking, I began to dislike Donald Trump even more, especially now today with how poorly he handles everything and how he presents himself as a godsend rather than a man of the people. My dad is unfortunately still under the spell and watches right-wing media that spreads hate all the time. I hope he can see Donald Trump for who he really is someday. Story 59. A person like Donald Trump does not become a leader in an educated and knowledgeable society. The system has been failing for some time now. Donald Trump was just in the right place at the right time, or perhaps the wrong place at the wrong time. If this is where we are as a society collectively, as much as I hate to say it, we deserve whatever is coming. Story 60. I just want to point out how many people responding here evidently thought the Muslim ban was excusable. It is appalling to me how the country has continued to shrug off the original sin of his candidacy. He launched his entire platform on overt, unmasked Islamophobia and the promise of religious oppression in a country founded on religious freedom. Still, some say, the moment he disqualified himself was something he did way after that. We need to do some serious reflecting on that as a country because it is truly shameful. Story 61. Too long. Didn't read, when individuals were personally affected, and not before. Story 62. I realized that I was a different person than I thought I was. I saw the hatred his actions caused and understood that I and some friends were going to be impacted by what he did. Story 63. All I know is hate will never make the United States great. For those who stopped supporting him, thanks for waking up. Story 64. Living in Canada, the pro-Donald Trump Canadians became very quiet once the sovereignty threats and tariffs increased. Story 65. My uncle and his wife voted for Donald Trump the first and second time. Even though their son is transgender and voting for Donald Trump was obviously against their own child's interest and safety. When they continued to support Donald Trump after January 6th, I assumed nothing could change their minds, but they did not vote for him in 2024. I am pretty sure they did a write-in vote instead of voting for Kamala Harris, which is hardly better, but at least they are not full-throated supporters of his anymore. I am not entirely sure what the breaking point was for them. I think it was a slow wearing down, plus hopefully the shame of other people knowing they care more about a single issue, abortion, than their own living, breathing, and truly wonderful child. They also lightly consumed news media from outside of the Make America Great Again sphere, so they saw and heard facts and perspectives that probably never got mentioned on Fox News or Newsmax. Story 66. Immigration. Deporting illegal immigrants who are criminals, especially those involved in violent crime, is something I fully support. Arresting 18-year-olds on their first day of college is unfair. Story 67. For my grandparents, it was me marrying my wife who overstayed her visa and thus became undocumented. They realized that not all undocumented immigrants described on Fox News are evil criminals. Many are decent and loving human beings. Story 68. I voted for Donald Trump twice in 2016 and 2020. The attempted coup on January 6th and later downplaying the seriousness of those events is what really opened my eyes. Police were killed. Senators were forced to run for their lives. Mike Pence, one of our supporters, was called a traitor for upholding his oath to the Constitution. This is not supposed to happen in America. This is Panama or Guatemala-level dictator-for-life behavior. And then he pardoned all the January 6th participants. Shaking my head. Story 69. The theme here is the second he did something to harm me personally. Not the sexual assaults, the blatant racism, the felonies, the controversial behavior, the incoherent ramblings, and so on. And that is why I will never offer forgiveness or understanding to a MAGA supporter who claims to have changed. I hope each one has the day and life they deserve. Story 70. I was never Make America Great Again, but I supported many of Donald Trump's policies during his first term despite his bombastic personality. Comparing how he was from 2016 to 2020, the difference in mental competence is like night and day. Ultimately, in 2020 I voted for Joe Biden because of Donald Trump's personality, but I would not have minded a second term much until January 6th and the election denialism. That turned me away so strongly that I now vehemently detest him. Story 71. Realizing that drain the swamp just meant refilling it with his own people. Story 72. For me, it was just listening to debates of an educated liberal who was quick on his feet and quick to shut down the stupidity of the Make America Great Again movement. The first debate I saw was him arguing with another liberal about something most of the Make America Great Again movement would agree on, which made me actually think, maybe this guy isn't such a liberal like I thought. Then I kept watching, and over time I realized how dumb the Make America Great Again movement sounded in debates compared to him, how they were unable to substantiate their ideas and always were quick to insult him instead of defend their ideas. Over time, I just drifted to the left. Funny enough, I don't think my core values of free speech and pro-freedoms really changed that much. It was more that I realized one party represents them better. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.